This is the city of Memphis, Tennessee. It's a large metropolitan area placed upon the lower Mississippi River. It's a cultural city with landmarks like Beale Street standing out, but it's been struck by economic decline and high crime and poverty rates. Most people would tell you it's not a great place to live. This is St. Louis, placed upon the upper Mississippi River, where the Missouri meets with it. This city is also known for its economic and population decline, which has led to high crime and poverty. Though St. Louis has done some work to revitalize, it still isn't the best place to live. What about a city like Baton Rouge? It's the capital that's home to a large university, so it would be in decent condition, right? Well, you know that's not true. Baton Rouge has high crime and poverty, and the population is stagnant. These cities all have one thing in common, which is their location along the incredibly important Mississippi River. With the importance of this river, you'd think the historic population could have boomed, and these cities could continue growing present day, but that's not the case. So today I want to look at the Mississippi River and talk about why a megalopolis or string of urbanization never formed in this area. Before that though, I want to yet again quickly promote my merch. I released merch for my 100k subscriber milestone, so if you want to go support me, please check out some of the stuff we have at beavergeography.shop linked in the description. I also have a signed shirt giveaway for all channel members, plus one lucky member of my Discord that will be drawn at the end of April. So yeah, please consider checking that stuff out to support me and my channel. Thank you! We all know the importance of the Mississippi River. It's always been pretty clearly the nation's most important river and had major impacts on the historic transportation of the country. It sort of splits the US down the middle, running 2,340 miles from northern Minnesota at a lake I can't pronounce, all the way to its delta in southern Louisiana. Along its path, it sees cities like the Twin Cities in Minnesota, the Quad Cities in Iowa and Illinois, St. Louis, Memphis, Baton Rouge, and finally New Orleans. Now, those are some fairly important cities, but there really aren't that many of them when you think about it. And what's more important is that, especially on the lower Mississippi, these cities are not really growing at all. Our idea of a megalopolis requires continuous urbanization, which requires lots of suburban growth. Now, obviously, this does not exist in this region, but why? I feel like with the amount of historic travel, there are several locations that could have been major cities. Vicksburg is a big one, and though the growth was stunted by it being burned during the Civil War, it still had the opportunity to rebuild. You'd expect something near the confluence of the Arkansas and Missouri River in eastern Arkansas, at least in one way or another, maybe the St. Francis River a bit to the north. Then obviously Cairo, which whether you know what happened or don't, seems like an obvious point for settlement. Cape Girardeau to the north could have been much larger, and that brings us up to St. Louis. It seems obvious that these many important locations could benefit from the river's traffic and form a continuous urban corridor. And yet they don't, so let's dive into the history to find out why this is. So looking all the way back, the river was incredibly important to Native Americans, with Cahokia being located on the east side of the Mississippi River near St. Louis. At one point, this was the largest settlement in the U.S., with anywhere from 15,000 to 30,000 residents around the year 1000. Stretching from Cahokia into East St. Louis and even into St. Louis. This can be seen with the several large mounds in the area that were built by its former residents. Fast forwarding, several explorers used the river for navigation, like Marquette and Joliet, which founded European settlements in Green Bay and Prairie du Chien, among others. Hernando de Soto also used the river, but he was boring and didn't found any settlements. After the Louisiana Purchase then, settlements immediately started popping up. Vicksburg was settled in 1809, Cairo in 1818, Dubuque in 1834, among others. This is around the introduction of steamboats to the area, where commerce became a massive industry. Along the lower Mississippi River, cotton also became a massive industry, and these cities began to quickly grow. This is where I feel as though the river and its surrounding region had a real chance to urbanize and connect, at least in one area, like Louisiana or Missouri. But a string of problems occurred that stunted growth. Firstly, the New Madrid earthquakes in 1811 and 1812 destroyed several cities and cost the area greatly. Secondly, as I previously mentioned, the Civil War occurred, and many of these cities either economically struggled or were literally just burnt down, which ends up being pretty annoying for them. Thirdly, the Big Freeze in 1918 and 19 stunted river traffic in the middle region of the river, messing up these cities' economies for a good year. Fourthly, yes, there's a fourthly, and this one's the biggest, is the Great Mississippi River Flood of 1927. So I've been holding back from mentioning flooding for the sake of forming a full video, but the Mississippi River has always been extremely prone to flooding. The lower Mississippi especially has low elevation change, and it also supports 41% of the continental US as water. When you have water coming from a bulk of the northern US in Minnesota and Wisconsin and everywhere else, Something happens after winter where all the snow melts and water rises, causing serious spring flooding. The biggest flood event was the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927, where 27,000 square miles of land were flooded and over 200,000 people were displaced. There were several others, including the 1993 flood and the 2011 flood. But the biggest thing about 1927 is that it killed growth in basically any city along the river, and it resulted in the Army Corps of Engineers' Mississippi River and Tributaries Project, which built levees and spillways on any city that needed them. This flood affected Arkansas City, Arkansas, Greenville, Mississippi, Baton Rouge, Memphis, Vicksburg, and anywhere else. All of these cities had to rebuild much of their settlement, and that's been what's been stopping cities from forming along the river. Using Cairo, Illinois as my final example, it was in a perfect geographical location at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio. Many thought it had the opportunity to become a new Chicago. There was a big fort there, so with that and boat commerce, it grew significantly in the 1800s and even into the 1900s. It peaked at 14,000 residents, but then it was hit by flooding, and the economy died. During the rebuilding process, there was serious racial violence, and many white residents, who were usually wealthier at this point, left the city. The population quickly dropped by over 10,000 residents, and it was flooded even more in 1993 and 2011, contributing to even more displacement. Government services closed down, including federal housing, citing unlivable conditions. And then suddenly, we hit present day with little to no improvement. That's the worst example, but it's what you see out of a lot of the cities that were created along the Mississippi River, which is simply not friendly to historical settlements. You can't have a long string of cities along the river because you really can't have cities at all in a lot of these locations. And the direction this region has gone in has just been really tough. Now, you may ask, if things are so bad, why does somewhere like New Orleans or St. Louis exist? Well, there's a good answer to that. Starting with New Orleans, it's simply too economically important to the river's commerce to die. All the traffic from the Mississippi goes through this city, and that has kept it going for hundreds of years now. By the way, that's not to say New Orleans hasn't had these problems. We all know what things are like in the city, with Hurricane Katrina destroying much of the city, and rising sea levels making life increasingly difficult for engineers. Really, New Orleans is in as bad of a location as any for the many problems of the river, but it's been held together. So why is St. Louis a major city rather than somewhere like Cairo, Illinois? Well, there's two interesting facts. First, to make a city on the Mississippi, you basically need bluffs and more topography, something St. Louis has with its relation to the Mark Twain National Forest and the Ozarks. Second, its relation to the Missouri River is actually less important. Rather, it had significant importance before the idea of dredging rivers, which is essentially digging a path for boats in rivers that used to be relatively shallow. In the lower Mississippi, the water was deep enough for large steamboats, but at some point the water got shallow, and these large boats would have to switch to smaller vessels that could go farther upstream. This location where the switch had to occur was right at St. Louis, so its relation to the river ended up being much more important than somewhere like Cairo, which was really just a rest stop. So all of those factors come together to show us why a continuous string of cities didn't form along our nation's most important river. They tried, but this is really just a situation where God didn't want a megalopolis here. So he just sent some of the toughest geographical factors possible that were just too difficult to deal with. Present day, instead of being a rich urban region, the lower Mississippi River Valley has some of the worst poverty in the country, with a map of the poverty rate in Mississippi being a sad yet fascinating example of this that can be clearly seen. The area still has fascinating culture, with some of the best music coming from this area. Jazz and the blues were prominent here, especially in cities like New Orleans and Memphis. It's rich in culture, and realistically, we don't need another megalopolis anyways. Thanks for watching. Thank you to the members this week: Luffy Raharan, Lady Nightingale, J.L. Enrigo, the Autistic City Skylines fan, Richard Law, Husaga, Jake Hoofs, Kaziman, Alexander, Laura Halliday, The Road Dude, Charles Watson, Pete Tedeschi, Aiden Kyle, Zamnam Woods, KG, The Happy Hodag, Reginald Wilkerson, Grant Dickerson, John Haywood, Julius Landry, Philip Monroe, Doug R., Midwest Rail fan, Andre Scantero, DS, Richard Horwell, McCassner, Deef, Stephen Phillips, CJ Brick, Big Pasty, Resident Contrarian, Hazev the Wolf, Bunny, Brock Sanders, Stephen Priestman, SB Wilder, Florida Jake, Sergey C17, Alex Williams, Mickey Martinoff, Kurt Ainsley, TMS162, Jonathan, Bryson, Rosebud 4, Darkbird, Wolfling73, Snyder Schwein, Benjamin Whitings, and Ryan Devins. I appreciate you all so much. If you want to become a member, the link is down in the description below. City Skylines videos will be coming back next week, so if you want to watch those, just become a member. It's really cheap, and it just helps me out as a person. Thank you so much.